well, I'm a PTA and woe is me. And I'm just a PTA. And the word just, drives me insane. And I was like, okay, I'm going to stop replying to them. And I'm just going to start talking to people who are doing amazing things in the field and just show them, here's where you can get plugged in. Here's a route. Here's a path. You have to make the next choice. Kick it.
Welcome to Strata Stories. My name is Thomas Schreiber. I'm the Director of Marketing here at StrataPT. StrataPT combines your EMR and billing into one automated system to increase revenue and achieve a 99.99% reimbursement rate for physical, occupational, and speech therapy clinics. Recently, StrataPT was ranked the #1 EMR and billing system in outpatient therapy and rehab from Class Research. On today's episode, Paul Singh, the CEO of StrataPT, talks with Katie Sutton, PTA and the host of the PTA Plus podcast. Katie and Paul talk through unlocking untapped potential of PTAs in your clinic, low-cost ways to invest in your PTA team, why nursing's multi-entry pathway could be a blueprint for rehab, and lastly, expanding roles and leadership opportunities beyond job titles. If you'd like to learn more about StrataPT and see how our EMR and billing works, head over to stratapt.com to book a demo. Now, without further delay, here's today's episode.
I thought that your LinkedIn, though, was pretty interesting because the theme I got as I was reading through it, I don't know if this was intentional or not, but I kind of wrote down jack of all trades PTA. And I mean that as a compliment, by the way, that like you seem like you've got such a breadth of experience and you have this ability to kind of make relatively complex topics really accessible. I'll just also preface this. I'm not a PT, never been a PTA. Despite my Indian parents, I'm not a doctor, lawyer, engineer, anything like that, right? So why the focus on PTAs in particular? I'm curious.
Yeah, so I am myself a PTA. I've been a PTA for 20 plus years. And one of the things that I pride myself on is that I became a PTA. I knew I wanted to do a little bit more with my career. So I went back to school and got my bachelor's degree in business management. And then I got into PTA education and worked in education. I'm like, there's still a little bit more there that I want to do. And so I got my master's degree and it was in liberal arts and it had like this human structure function development kind of key to it and some educational aspects and online learning and things like that. So I've kept going and doing these things to make myself who I am today. But I've never once said, I want to go back to school to be a doctor of physical therapy. I'm really happy being a physical therapist assistant. It's been a good career for me. So for me, I like to try to highlight all the things that we can do as PTs and PTAs that don't necessarily match our title, or they're not exactly tied to a title alone.
There's a theme that keeps coming out in your LinkedIn, though, of pushing boundaries beyond titles. And obviously, that's probably a nuanced thing. Anyway, I'm curious if you can kind of expand on that, because I think it's kind of relevant to what you were just talking about, like your own experience as a PTA and stuff like that. So what does it mean, like in terms of pushing boundaries? What is that? Oh, actually, it was the part about where you said pushing boundaries beyond titles. I was like, what does she mean by that? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think in the PTA world, we attach so much to our title PTA. And I actually had a guest on my own podcast, PTA Plus, a while back who said that she was working with an individual who said, why do you put so much emphasis on the A? So physical therapist assistant. And this person said, you're putting so much emphasis on the assistant, but you're forgetting to talk about all of the great things that you can do with your license and with your skill set and things like that. So that always kind of resonated with me. But as far as when it comes to pushing boundaries, I like to say that I really enjoy showing up to events or places where there aren't going to be other PTAs or that there isn't supposed to be PTAs and just showing up in the room and then asking a bunch of questions. Some of my pathway to where I got right now is very much so against the grain. It's very non-traditional. So I'll even go way back to high school. So this was, of course, a million years ago, but I went to a technical education center. So I graduated from high school, but I also graduated from technical education. And at the time, back in 1999, that was looked at as the place where people went who weren't going to go to college. It was, well, that's where all the kids go who don't necessarily have a plan or a pathway or a future. But that technical career center is what plugged me into physical therapy. And because of that technical career center, I was in a health program They got me connected into a PT department, and I worked as an aide all the way through PTA school. And so, I kind of think in my head, I would like to go back to the counselors from high school who said, maybe you're not college material, or, maybe there's something else you can do besides college. And, here I am 3 degrees later, potentially looking at an EDD in the future. It's
Yeah.
like all these things. I'm like, well, you tried to define my story. You tried to label my story before you even knew what I was capable of doing. And so to me, I try to remove some of those boundaries and barriers to what we see or what we think or perceive are boundaries and barriers that we can't cross. So I kind of like to push the button a little bit and ask some more questions.
Okay, so this might be a controversial question, and we can pass
Okay.
on if you like. But within like the clinics that you've seen, are PTAs better equipped for like certain roles or responsibility in clinics than maybe their other peers? I don't want to turn this into like PTAs versus other
Sure,
disciplines,
yeah.
but I guess the question becomes like, are there things that you notice just in broad trends maybe that PTAs might be better at? Like, are there leadership or other business roles or other roles entirely within the clinical or within the context of outpatient care that maybe PTAs are better equipped for?
It's a great question, and I don't find it controversial at all. I think that this has become a much more analyzed topic than what it was 5 or 10 years ago. So our accreditation standards in PT and PTA education are starting to force PT and PTA students to like talk together a little bit more, which is like a novel idea, right? Like, why haven't we done this for? We've been in the profession for over 50 years. Like now we're finally going, oh, we should probably figure out what each other does before we decide to jump into the clinic together, right? As a PTA, this is threaded into what I do. This is part of my license. I am responsible to follow the physical therapist plan of care. It's legal. It's what we do. It's in our ethical standard. That's what we do is follow the PT's plan of care. So we like to say that we're intervention specialists. I see this a lot in PTA education where we get DPT students and PTA students together, and we just have them ask questions like, tell me about your books, your textbooks. What made you get into this field? Get to know each other as a human being first. And then we start to ask them questions about cases, and we give them some cases to look at. So here's a patient. Is this appropriate for the PTA to be treating this patient? What kind of legal and insurance things do you need to look at? And so we allow the students to kind of navigate these cases together. And oftentimes the PT students, the DPT students are so floored at how many interventions the PTA students know to do with the patients, and are also kind of blown away that the PTAs are able to do more in the clinic than what they thought. So to me, it's a very like groundbreaking moment for these DPT students to kind of go, oh, they're allowed to do way more than what I thought they were able to do, or they can pursue certifications and advanced pathways to make themselves a more qualified practitioner in the clinic.
I like the way you presented that, by the way, because it's not, one's better than the other. It's just that in the way that you explained it there, the PTAs just have much more breadth, much more touch points, if you will, than maybe they're given credit for. In my line of work, I would say these days, I talk to a lot of clinic owners, and, the common concern is like, man, it's hard to hire right now and stuff like that. I certainly don't hear them talk about PTAs enough, though. Nobody ever says, oh, I'm only looking to hire DPTs or whatever. Nobody actually says that, at least in my world, but they commonly keep talking about like, the staffing shortages and hiring challenges. Yeah. I feel like clinic owners are kind of sleeping on all the upsides of a PTA. And I don't think they're doing it explicitly. I don't think there's like some ulterior motive. We're not going to hire PTAs. I think it's almost like they just don't know. Like to your point, these PTAs have more breadth of knowledge, or more breadth of touch points than most people give them credit for. And I noticed that on the clinic owner side. But I guess the question would be like, how should clinic owners be thinking about PTAs in the context of like all these hiring shortages and challenges right now?
Yeah. So there are two things on that. I think first it needs to go all the way back to the beginning. I think there's been some articles published through the American Physical Therapy Association and a couple other places that talk about there is going to be a shortage of physical therapists in the future, right? So we know this, we see it coming. So from the educator perspective, from my point of view with education and knowing what PTAs learn in less than 2 years, the National Physical Therapy examination that they take, that's only an hour less time than the PTs and a handful of questions. I think we're like, maybe don't mark my words on this, people. Please don't send hate mail. I think it's like 20 or 40 questions less than the DPTs, but it's not like a significant amount here. Okay. So I guess what my point is why are we not looking to our pool of PTAs that are licensed to get them into these PT roles in the future? Like, can we make better, easier, accessible bridge programs so that PTAs can become DPTs easier, quicker than what it is? Because right now, if you're a PTA and you want a bridge to be a DPT, you got to get your bachelor's degree, you got to apply to a program, all these like steps and whatnot. But we have these PTAs that have been in the clinic for decades. Like, they have a ton of clinical experience. So I guess from an educational perspective, with my education hat on, can we make a true bridge program? Do we have to have PTA and DPT? Why can't we have a multi-entry field? Think of our nursing friends. They come in as LPNs, they come in as ADNs, they come in as BSNs. So like, is there room for us to have a multi-entry into the field so maybe we could fill some of these gaps easier and quicker? So that's something that I kind of have really harped on a lot. And anybody who listens to my podcast has probably heard me talk about this quite a bit. And I have a couple of friends on my side here that were like, yeah, we need to make this happen, and that is a little controversial in the field, I would say. But the second thing is I would like to encourage practice owners to consider, if they were to hire a PTA, to really start pouring in and investing in those PTAs. Okay, so if you hire one, really encourage them to get advanced proficiency pathways. Really encourage them to take specific CEUs that are going to only enhance your business. Because if you get a PTA in there who's willing to continue to learn and is driven to kind of achieve beyond that, they're only going to help your bottom line. It's going to make the clinic run smoother, and I would venture to say increase your revenue if you can do that. But I think the key is finding somebody who's willing to kind of take those opportunities and finding a clinic that can pour into them a little bit. And I don't mean like, you don't necessarily have to financially pour into them, but knowing the PTA, knowing that they're supported to seek out these different pathways and advance proficiencies and whatnot means a lot.
When you talk about that idea of investing in them and you put that caveat, it doesn't always have to be financial. Have you seen any things like that work particularly well? Are there in your experiences, have you seen any practice owners where, and you don't have to name names or anything like that, right? Because it's probably confidential, but programmatically, have you seen any practice owners do something like real world to kind of like implement some of these ideas you just shared?
Yeah. There's a few people who come to mind, and because I'm Ohio based, I think a lot of my Ohio colleagues, and I don't want to brag on just Ohio, because I know other states are doing amazing things as well. But Ohio has always been extremely supportive of PTAs. So we have a ton of PT and PTA programs. I think there's upwards of 19 PTA programs currently in the state of Ohio. So from a leadership perspective, in our chapter or our association, the Ohio Physical Therapy Association, we have a ton of PTAs in leadership positions. And our association has always really pushed that and embraced it. Now, the reason why I'm getting to this is because that's one of the ways that I've networked a lot with some of the PTs and PTAs in the state of Ohio. And they have, some of the private practice areas have really figured out that key to investing in each other. And sometimes the PTAs that I talk to don't end up working as a PTA in the end, because this physical therapist, the practice owner, is like, you know what, man, you're really good at something else. Like, man, you're really good at front desk or revenue management or some insurance, whatever it is. Sometimes these PTAs transition into different roles, or it might be health coaching or personal training. Like, they might kind of veer into different directions. So just by investing in somebody, figuring out what their strengths are, you might find that person is not necessarily in the role that you thought they were going to be in initially. And I've seen that kind of take a couple of different paths as well.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I've seen, I mean, two examples that come to mind. One, there's this one clinic owner where I've seen he will I don't think he limits it just to his PTAs. I think it's to everybody there. But he has if those employees show any sort of like affinity for social media or whatever, he'll actually help not only train them and like pay for the training for this, but in terms of video creation, all that stuff. But I think he gives like something like 2 hours of their paid time to just content creation, and so that's how he invests in those folks. And then the other one that comes to mind is another practice owner I met where I remember he specifically called out PTAs. I'm forgetting; he'll come back to me in just a minute. But he specifically called out PTAs, and in their employment contracts, they get a couple $1,000s per quarter for leveling up their PTA training, and it's basically a pathway to, if they want, towards like the DPT in the long term. But the interesting part in that contract that he was showing me was that I think there was like a clawback. It was like, hey, if we spend the money every quarter, you're only on the hook for paying half of it back if you leave within 6 months. And so the idea was like, he's not trying to like make them indentured servants, but they've got to like understand that they can't just like use the benefit and then disappear 30 days later or something like that. But I remember looking at the contract because I was like, show me what this looks like. And he shared his screen and he walked me through the contract. I thought it was pretty fair. He was like, hey, here's how much you can spend for every quarter. And obviously it can't be on like something outside of this. It's really about furthering your career and and it was like a 6-month term or something like that, where it was like, and I was like, okay, that's fair. You don't want to pour 10 grand into somebody and then they leave 2 days later or something like that. I think one of the consistent themes though I hear from not only what you say here, but also like on your own content is, this idea that these PTAs, it's almost like somebody's got to advocate for them more. I think that the theme is kind of like, hey, clinic owners, like you can utilize these people more than you probably already do. And they probably have more capabilities. They're probably getting overlooked for like, other roles within the clinic. And you sort of alluded to that just a moment ago. I guess maybe the question I would ask you is, if you had a magic wand, what does the PTA role look like, you think, in 5-10 years, like just some arbitrary date in the future? Is there a picture you can paint of what that looks like, you think?
100%, because I do work in PTA education, I see the strain that it is. I mean, we're teaching. So in Ohio, we're capped at 65 credit hours. Like we can't go above 65 credit hours per state law. Okay. But there are PTA programs in other states that have upwards of 77 credit hours or pushing 80 credit hours. So here's the thing. We're all held to the same standard though. We all have to pass the same national physical therapy examination, right? So we have these huge variations in the amount of education we can give that person, but we are still held to the same accreditation standards and still held to the same national examination standards. So my theory and thought in question is why we can't do this is, again, going back to that multi-entry into the field. So if somebody's like, hey, I want to come in, I want to be a PTA, but I'm happy to only get my associate's degree. So I want to do this route. I have a family, I'm already established. I want in and out as quickly as I can so I can start treating patients and start earning money right away. But there might be a place for a person who wants to get a bachelor's degree or a master's degree that could have different pathways, right? So there are some schools that are kind of looking at this and have started to expand on bachelor degree programs for PTAs, but they're not accredited yet because accrediting body has said, no, not right now. So you can take those, but it's not necessarily going to change the way that we're viewed in the profession right now. It does help with education and of course your skills and things like that. But in my mind, it makes sense for us to really start looking at other professions. And I think we heard this a lot at the Future of Rehab Therapy Summit was, what can we learn from our other friends in other professions and disciplines, what they're doing? And we see this like in nursing. Again, I hate to keep going back to that, but they have a perfect example of this. But so in my mind, 5-10 years from now, we would have the ability to have a multi-entry for that physical therapist assistant that could look different. So if this is the career path you're on and you want to stay a PTA and that's all you want to do, that's totally fine. We need you too. If you have a desire to go on to PT school later or to have further education or go into management or marketing or all of these things that we just talked about, here's a pathway for you. And so to me, it would be a beautiful thing if we could have some variation in that entry into the field.
I don't know how to articulate this question, but I think a lot of our conversation so far has been sort of maybe like high level in the sense of, hey, maybe the governing body could change this, or maybe the practice owner could change that, or something like that. What if we were to like sort of flip the script a little bit, and let's pretend we're talking to, just imagine here, I'm just a visual, right? So it's like, just imagine there's like 10 fresh PTAs sitting in front of us or whatever. What would your advice be to them? Here we are, mid 2025. They've probably got, personal goals and families and things like that. They probably can't afford to wait until the governing body changes this or the clinical owners see their value, right? That would be nice to happen. And by the way, I just want to be clear. I'm not saying those are bad ideas. I think those are important. They have to happen. But on the flip side, you've got this like hypothetical of 10 fresh PTAs sitting here right in front of us, mid 2025. Is there specific advice you might give them on how they can sort of, I'm genuinely trying to keep this broad, like how they can maybe advocate for themselves, how they can kind of further their careers? Like, what should they be doing? What should a fresh PTA in 2025 be doing, you think, to build that career they want? To your point, whether they want in the long term to move to marketing or move to becoming the DPT, like what would your advice be to the fresh PTAs?
I get to do that a lot, actually, sit in front of fresh PTAs and talk. Yeah. So my biggest takeaway for them would be to plug in. You have to find some place to plug in. So just to kind of expand on this a little bit, I hear so much about burnout. And I'm sure that you probably hear a lot about that too in the field that you are working so closely with these healthcare professionals. You hear burnout a lot. And I take issue with the word burnout. So again, going against the grain here, I think that the antidote to burnout is to getting yourself plugged into something. So for me, coming into education, I knew I was going to have to give some things up. So when I came into education, I had to give up working in the clinic. I know that somebody would argue with me that I could still do PRN on the weekend, but I do like to see my family too. So it is what it is, right? So I found other ways to plug myself in. And that's how I kind of started getting involved in different leadership opportunities. And I took on different committee work and I started doing different advisory boards and things like that. I found a way to plug myself in. So I didn't feel like I was losing skills because I was building new skills instead. And those new skills continue to open new doors for me. So for me, it was all about finding the people I needed to talk to. When I go to a room and I'm looking around who's in the room, I'm picking out who I want to go and talk to and ask them more questions about whatever the thing is that I want to see happen or to do. It's kind of like that. There's a book, Proximity Principle, which I haven't read, but it's on my list of things to read here very soon. But the general gist of getting yourself closer to the things that you want to emulate or the things that you want to do, you got to get yourself plugged into those areas. That's what's going to be the catalyst to take you to the next level. And that's really one of the reasons why PTA Plus, the podcast was started, was because I'd go onto these. Of course, I had a lot of encouragement to do it too, but I would go onto these like Facebook groups, and all it is people complaining about, well, I'm a PTA and woe is me, and I'm just a PTA, and the word just, drives me insane. And I was like, okay, I'm going to stop replying to them. And I'm just going to start talking to people who are doing amazing things in the field and just show them, here's where you can get plugged in. Here's a route. Here's a path. You have to make the next choice.
I don't want to put words in your mouth, but like I'm nodding because I think that, the elephant in the room here is that for these hypothetical 10 fresh PTAs or whatever, the elephant in the room is that they have to stick their neck out a little bit and kind of get to your point with the proximity principle. Like they just have to, like nobody's holding them back. Yeah, there's all these things that we can do better, right? At the industry level and the clinic owner level. Of course, there's things we can do better. But ultimately, when I look at, any new graduate or something like that in any industry, I just find that one of the common trends across every industry is just that it really comes down to like them realizing that nobody's actually holding them back. There's no boogeyman around the corner that's saying like, nope, you're not going to go anywhere. You're going to be a PTA for the rest of your life, and this is what you're going to do. Like nobody's doing that. It's like this invisible script in their minds. So
nobody's coming to save you. Now there's a lot of lifeboats out there, right? There's tons of floaties in the water that you can grab onto, but no one's coming to save you. So if there's a lot of resources there though for you to latch onto. And that's why, they have to take the next step and they have to plug in. And it makes me so happy when a couple years down the road, fresh graduates will reach out to me or to a friend or somebody else in the profession and say, hey, I have some questions. How can I get involved? Where am I most needed? And I think that's a really important question to ask yourself too. Like, what am I good at? What are my skills? And where is that needed? Like, get yourself close to that.
The simple question I think that more people should ask themselves is, what do I really want? What does success look like for me? And I don't think it's enough of a topic that we openly discuss in the Western world anyway, but it could be power, it could be money, it could be freedom, it could be, notoriety, whatever it is. I think just having that frank, candid conversation with yourself of like what it really means. Like to your point, you want to see your family on the weekends. I'm the same way. It's like and then that gives you the clarity of, what you want to go look at, what you don't want to do, And so anyway, it seems so simple, but yet.
And then just to take that a bit further. So, you're speaking of all the things that you might like to do or that you're good at. And then the next question is, can I get paid for that? Is there a way I can get myself closer? Is there a job that I can do that?
Oh man, like I feel like I'm going to get canceled if I talk too much about this, but I think it's one of those, I think it's funny. Like, I think I will preface this by saying that again, I've never been a PT, PTA, DP. I've never been any of these things. Right. So I say this with respect because I've never been in that role, but I think ultimately, one of the things that I think every industry, every person in this country, I think could do better with is recognizing that entrepreneur is a verb. In most other countries, it's a noun here. And so let me say this more bluntly. So I was born here, but I was the child of immigrants. So I learned 2 languages growing up. So here's what's fascinating is the word entrepreneur is a noun in the English language. You can get on LinkedIn right now and you can just scroll past random profiles. They'll say entrepreneur, right? But in nearly every other language on the planet, the closest literal translation is a verb. Now, to be fair, these days there are nouns like either in Spanish, Portuguese, Punjabi, Hindi. There are nouns in 2025 that have become it. But if you were to look at the dictionaries of 10, 20, 30 years ago, predominantly the closest translation or the closest word that was always used was a verb. And I think there's something interesting in that, in this idea that for the rest of the world, entrepreneurship is a way you think. It's not who you are. Whereas in the Western world, entrepreneur is like, well, that's the clinic owner, or that's the podcast owner, or that's the business owner, and they are an entrepreneur. It's like, no, that's not how this works. I'll just bring it back to PTAs. I think more PTAs and frankly, more people within this entire PT industry, I wish they would just embrace this idea of thinking entrepreneurially, because you don't have to risk your family's future to do something. I think if you start with this clarity of what do I care about? Like I always tell people, I'm looking for fun and profit in that order. It sounds horrible to say out loud, but like it gives me a lot of clarity to say, like, if I'm not saying hell yeah to something, I'm going to say no. Anyway, I just think entrepreneurial thinking is something that more PTAs I think could embrace, and I think it would serve them really, really well. Because when we get to this topic of like, how do I get paid for this? Well, this is the part where I actually might get canceled on this topic. Is that like, look, no, this is great. I love it. Right? It's like, here's the thing. In every form of business, doesn't matter if we're talking about healthcare or not, you as an employee are either on the cost center side or the revenue center side. There is no in between. And, unfortunately, there's no world where everybody's on the revenue side, right? Like but for the entrepreneurial minded PTA that doesn't maybe know whether they want to be at the front desk or in marketing or actually just wants to see patients, like there's nothing wrong with any of those things. having that entrepreneurial bend or that thinking would suggest that, hey, maybe I should think about the business of healthcare and now work backwards from that to figure out like where I can truly add value. And that's how you get to the question of how do I get paid more for this? How do I help drive more revenue? Because that's the topic we're not talking enough about right now. We're sort of, as an industry, I should say, as an industry, we're kind of like, and this is not just you and me, I think the industry kind of says, nobody in the industry seems to be taking ownership of the problem themselves. It's, hey, that governing body needs to do this. That owner needs to do this. And those may be true, but I think it's also true to say that the PTA, and I keep picking on PTAs, but any professional in these industries, also kind of to your point, I love what you said earlier. Nobody's coming to save you. Nobody's going to wake up one day and be like, hey, you know what? I'm going to 10x your pay right now. Like that would be amazing, but nobody's going to do it, right? A promising PTA might start to look at, for example, the business model that a practice owner has and see if they could tie their work to an outcome. Like, hey, if I can drive this margin, what would that be worth to you? That sort of thing. By the way, I'm talking as if this is easy, right? But I know it's not. I think I will say though, I think we can all agree that like what's happening right now is probably not great. And so I'm just proposing, similar or other ideas as well. So by the way, I want to be respectful of your time because I think we could probably do like 10 episodes on this. Before I forget, where can people find you? Like if they want to, obviously you've mentioned your podcast, we'll include that in the show notes and stuff. If people want to like ask you questions, is it LinkedIn? Is it email? How can people find you?
Yeah, the best place to reach me is probably on LinkedIn. So if everybody who wants to talk to me is on LinkedIn, that would be great. I do also have a PTA plus email, which is PTA plus podcast at gmail.com. So that's another great place that they can reach out to me. I also have Instagram handle PTA plus. I think there might be an underscore in there. I don't know. And also PTA plus on Facebook as well. But and the podcast is everywhere that you hear podcasts, also on YouTube as well.
You see a lot of PTAs in your line of work. And I definitely don't want you to like name names or anything like that. But if you had to just, when you think about the breadth of your experience with PTAs over the years and stuff like that, I'm curious, what is like the most common, I don't know how to articulate this question. When you like, I feel like anytime you have been doing something for a long enough time, you develop a mental model. Like you can almost like, you're like, this one thing annoys me the most. So I'm curious, when you see all these PTAs in your line of work, what's like the most common mistake they're making? Like something that makes you groan. You're like, oh, like just to give you an example, I'll use business. Like I do a lot of tech investing, startup investing, stuff like that. What drives me nuts, like, is when founders and business owners, like when they make basic mistakes on, like, for example, how they define revenue or how they define like when they like, and they're always mistakes. It's not fraudulent. They're not trying to like, fraudulently tell me something different. They literally just could have Googled this. And that just drives me nuts. I'm like, okay, when I was in high school in the 90s, yeah, there were dumb questions because there wasn't, you Google, you had to ask, right? Your teacher would say like, hey, if you have the question, somebody else has it too, ask your question, right? Well, in 2025, there are dumb questions. You should probably Google it first. It drives me nuts, So I'm curious, is there something similar you see on the PTA side when you see all these, all these people?
Yes. So there's definitely
you can take a pass on this, by the way, if you want.
No, because I think it's important. And I think that people have heard me talk about both of these things before. But first of all, devaluing ourselves. So I told you earlier, the word just bothers me whenever I hear somebody say, well, I'm just a PTA. There's kind of like a running joke that PTAs hear a lot in the clinic. Like if I had $1 for every time a patient said to me, when are you going to be a real therapist? Or when are you going to finish school? So, but that also ties into, if you're providing good healthcare to your patient, if you're providing good services, they typically could care less who's treating them, right? I mean, by law, we have to introduce ourselves. Hi, my name is Katie Sutton. I'm a physical therapist assistant. Like they have to know who you are, completely true and accurate and sound. However, if you come in with passion and skill and you're good at what you do and you're making a good connection with that patient, they don't care what your title is. So we need to stop devaluing ourselves, right? I am completely happy working with a nurse practitioner versus an MD versus a DO. Like if they're providing me good care and they know what they're talking about, I'm cool with that, right? So we need to stop devaluing who we are as a licensed professional. PTAs are licensed in all states, I think, except for maybe one. There's like a registration or certification or something.
I love that. Actually, that's so good.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Strata Stories. StrataPT combines your EMR and billing into one automated system to increase revenue and achieve a 99.99% reimbursement rate for physical, occupational, and speech therapy clinics. If you'd like to learn more about StrataPT and see how our EMR and billing services work, head over to stratapt.com to book a demo.